Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today we're presenting the 1953 film Voyage to Italy, starring Ingrid Bergman and directed by her then husband, the legendary Roberto Rossellini. Now, this film didn't do so well in its original release, but in the ensuing years, it's had a tremendous influence on other filmmakers, and it's frequently ranked as one of the 10 greatest films ever made. We'll be talking about that and the complicated history of this film and its making after today's screening. It is a pleasure to have with us today my colleague from CUNY, Professor Eugenia Paulicelli, a noted expert on Italian literature and film, who will be discussing the film with us. Now, take this Voyage to Italy. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed your voyage to Italy in this extraordinary film by Roberto Rossellini, starring his then wife, Ingrid Bergman. Joining us for our 30 minutes of discussion is one of my colleagues from the City University of New York, Professor Eugenia Paulicelli. Eugenia teaches Italian literature and film, both at Queens College and at the Graduate Center. She's published widely on both literature and film, and right now is actually working on a longer-term project about the relationship between fashion and film, with a particular interest in Rossellini, Fellini, and Antonioni. This sort of glorious moment of this intersection of these two very distinguished Italian industries, cinema and fashion. Eugenia, let's start with just recovering a little bit what the relationship is between Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini at this point. How, they are husband and wife, but they're also collaborators. How did this all begin, and what's the sort of status of this when they're making this film?
Mm-hmm. It all began with a letter that Ingrid Bergman sent to Roberto Rossellini in 1948. And I read this letter.
Okay.
She says, "Dear Mr. Rossellini, I saw your films Open City and Paisan and enjoyed them very much. If you need a Swedish actress who speaks English very well, who has not forgotten her German, who is not very understandable in French, and who in Italian knows only ti amo, I'm ready to come and make a film with you, Ingrid Bergman."
Well,
that's how
I guess that worked out
started.
for them for a while, and for film, and for film history.
And then Rossellini, so the first film was Stromboli in 1950, and then followed by Journey to Italy, Viaggio in Italia. So there was 5 years films that he made with Ingrid Bergman. And of course, this was a big scandal for Catholic Italy, because Rossellini was married then, and also Ingrid Bergman was married. And at that time, of course, in Italy, there was no, divorce or law or anything, so they had to find a way. And then she became pregnant as well. So this was was a big scandal in the US as well, because she was not, I think, allowed to go on a TV show, because she was also seen as a sort of, sacred, different kind of star. Right. Playing this role of a saint.
She had been Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc, exactly.
Absolutely.
So, and there was a shock, to this kind of.
So when somebody is seeing this film in 1953, what I'll call the historical audience of the film, those first viewers, they're sort of bringing a lot of this to it. I mean, so what is this story about? A European woman who's discovering Italy going to be, because in a certain sense they may wish to allegorize it. Is this sort of Ingrid Bergman's discovery of Italy through her relationship with her director and then husband?
It's quite interesting, and I would say this film is so rich of all these implications in and off screen. And so what was going on? First of all, it was, I think, shock for their personal relationship to the world. but also a shock for Ingrid Bergman to leave a sort of familiar method of acting and dealing, with cinema and making film, and then coming to Italy and working with one of the masters that was worldly recognized, one of the masters of neorealism. So Rossellini had a completely different method in filmmaking, and so that was another shock. In fact, in an interview, she says in Rome, she says, "Oh, to me it was absolutely, I didn't know what to do because, Rossellini had something in the script, of course, some notes and everything, but he wanted really to experiment while filming and working with actors. So there was a completely different way of filmmaking, and that was a shock. And the other shock, of course, was the cultural shock. Italy. Italy in the early 50s, Italy in the post-war, Italy was reconstructing, after the Marshall Plan and everything. So Italy was gradually developing
but the economic miracle has not completed. Not completed.
Yet.
No.
It was. I think that also cinema was important as an industry and an art to put Italy in a global map. Being sort of a modern, is a different country. I mean, not just this, peasant country as it was been categorized, before. But foreigners, and especially Americans, of course, started to fall in love with this country because of the history, because of the art and the food and all these kind of things that have been sort of, becoming stereotypical in identifying, Italian. And this film, indeed, also you can see how this film depicts that kind of fascination of foreigners, the Joyce, the couple, arriving to Naples in a Bentley, so upper class, from the northern Europeans.
Right, absolutely.
And of course, this is also, myth in literature, a lot, Europeans, Northern Europeans coming to Italy, the Grand Tour, that kind of background,
which has been going on for several centuries. Exactly. Northern Europeans need to get into contact with the European origins of the classical world.
The ruins,
but beware, because this is the world that fell. And we're the people who are now on top. So take your heritage from the South, but be wary of all the bad habits they have, and that's why they're in ruins.
Right, and I think indeed the film, the opening shots are really quintessential in depicting that kind of shock, that kind of. Sort of opposition somehow, and you can see it in the way, in the very beginning you see this road, you don't know where you're going, really, you see an empty road. To me that reminded a little bit of the opening of Ossessione by Visconti, 1942. Just the open, this road. And then you see these two characters, and she is overdressed.
Absolutely.
Really, she is springtime. She's wearing a leopard, sophisticated fur coat, reading a book, So it's a diva.
Absolutely.
Really, she's represented in this kind of, but also as an oppositional, kind of, with the landscape.
Right. Well, you bring up, I think, an excellent point here, because they're immediately not only identified as Northern European and of a certain class, but also of a particular concept of travel, in which travel is an opportunity to not so much to relax, but to conspicuously display your elegance. in a certain kind of way while not doing this. So to put it, in rather crude terms, there's no impulse here to be in a jogging outfit because you're comfortable while traveling. No, there's a particular way to show yourself as you're traveling.
Also, if I can add something here in particular with the costume of this film, because when I was doing research for my book of the 1930s fashion, I had the occasion to interview Ferdinando Gattinoni, who actually made the clothes, the costumes for the film. And this maison was really near, is still there. She's dead now. I interviewed her in 2000. She was in 90 then. And she showed me some pictures of Ingrid Bergman because, she became also her customer.
Okay.
So she sort of re-glamorized her in Italian style. And so this is very interesting because the costumes, the way, she's dressed in the film is also very interesting, to see, because she's depicted also as a very elegant and sophisticated.
Absolutely.
Very uptight. She has always this shirt, button up, very serious, very composed, very sophisticated elegance, flats, no heels. Very, very interesting, the umbrella.
Always prepared for those showers that may fall.
It's quite interesting also, that kind of depiction of the character, and also the fact that in those years, 1950s, early 50s, 1952, Italian fashion was launched at the Sala Bianca in Florence, and Gattinoni was one of the designers with the Fontana sisters. So it's interesting, all this synergy started then with filmmaking.
That we're then going to see flower throughout the 50s and the 60s with, again, to leap ahead, with the famous costuming, particularly in Fellini and Antonioni and their portrayal.
Right. And also stars, the stars become testimonials. So, because Ingrid Bergman had, her own stature as a, as a star.
Well, you could even say aura.
Iconic.
Absolutely.
And of course, that also was an important element, I would say, link. And to follow this idea of, to continue this idea of the shock, in the traveling, we see these two characters. Of course, is a marriage in crisis.
Right.
Is a couple that they go there because of legal issues regarding the death of a relative and so forth.
But that's the excuse for the exploration of their marriage.
And then, so it's the idea, it's the traveling, and this is what, the film is sort of, the camera sort of follows this self-discovery.
Right.
And Rossellini here is really focused on her, on Catherine, Catherine Joyce,
right.
the Joyce.
Right.
And so through her, she becomes a sort of prototype,
right.
of the wanderer, of the woman traveler that will be in the Antonioni's trilogy, for example.
Right, absolutely.
So that's very important.
Exactly. La Notte, l'Avventura, Eclipse.
Exactly. So the wanderer. She's the one who actually wants to discover this place, who wants to know. He refuses to go with her. So there is all this tension within, of course, the relationship, but also the fact that she's curious to explore. She wants to be in a situation which is also shocked and moved, and so there's a lot of emotions going on in that film.
Yeah, I want to talk about this just for a moment because I think it is such a good point, and his management in the film of space, because I want to come back to the car, and then you begin with the car, and then this is a film that has an incredibly high incidence of optical point of view shots of somebody looking from one space into another space or around the space. So, for example, when they get to the uncle's home, in a kind of Hollywood treatment of that, you would just very briefly, you know, oh, here's this, here's that, and you wouldn't spend all of this time exploring the space of the house as Rossellini does, because this is one of her first introductions to a culture that lives in a very, very different way, and a European who has chosen to adopt this this culture. And then, just to follow your line of reasoning, but the specific spatial treatment, it's as if, you know, they begin entrapped and protected by this car, and each one of her wanderings is a wandering out into not only a new location, but to some other aspect of the culture, and getting into direct contact with it, as opposed to the mediated contact of seeing it through the windows of the car.
Yes, it's somehow space is, time, because I think there's a strong connection here with also memory, history. Maybe we should talk about that. But this is, time becomes spatialized somehow.
Absolutely correct.
So, for example, history and memory. They are in the sun, the couple, and so she brings, you know, back the memory of this past admirer who died during the war. So, and somehow, you know, she expresses the desire to go back to sort of revisit these places he described to her in his letters. Of course, this upsets him. The husband, so he's sort of reacts in a sort of jealousy of this past. This idea is sort of a passionate past, you see, because it's all also played against this idea of the passionate Italian, the passionate, you know, sort of
and lack immediately. Exactly,
they are loud, you know, all this, you know, all these things that they are sort of bothering, you know, him. It's everything is sort of it's an intrusion to his own, you know, defense.
Absolutely.
So it's quite interesting that she sort of would like to explore, because also she's very defensive. Even the way, you know, again, as I said, as she dresses when she goes, very, very, you know, kind of. But at the same time, she wants to understand. And I think Rossellini is successful in this film and in other films in showing how difficult it is to understand. You know, how difficult it is to understand and link things. You know, he talked about that, how he didn't like, you know, a narrative that it was linked, you know, in a sort of a linear. That's why he didn't like the idea of the script, you know, following 1, 2, 3 things. But he wanted to concentrate on certain episodes. He's well known, you know, his sort of method and technique and the intensity of that particular episode and scene, and that brings, you know, is like a Proustian, you know, in literature, is like, you know, this sort of emotional relationship with reality, you know.
Well, and let me introduce, since this is such a visually rich film with so many scenes of such visual density of this. Let me introduce one of the words that we scholars do like, and all of that, borrowing from art history, palimpsest. This whole notion that you're looking at a painting in which has been painting over any number of other layers, and so you are aware of how many, and this is spatializing time, you're aware of how many periods, how many layers of time exist within this one spatial configuration. And I think that's one of the things that that in this kind of tableau method that he has of going from scene to scene, we're in the same scene, but we keep sort of sinking into other layers of what's going on emotionally, or, you know, even historically here.
In fact, well, the scene on the terrace and the sun, of course, there the references to James Joyce's The Dead. And so that particular is sort of reenacting one thing. So there's already, you know, this relation, this extra textual, you know, this sort of layer. the archaeological visit that she, that's a fantastic, I mean, sequence where she really, you see the close-up of the statues. And so what is striking also there is how to, you know, how to capture the movement, right?
Right.
Capturing the movement, which was one of sort of, you know, the cinematic, you know, when the cinema started,
right.
the idea that the imager, you know, can move, right?
Right.
So this idea, and time, of
right.
course. So all that exploration, so it's not surprising, for example, that Jean-Luc Godard, in one of the scenes of A Contempt, there are all these statues, you know, it directly quotes Rossellini in this exploration of, but also self-reflection of the, making film, you know, making film,
let me just
what
say,
film means.
We've already leapt ahead to the way in which Rossellini is a kind of godfather to what Antonioni is going to be doing. But to give him, you know, the credit what he deserves within film history, this is a film that is taken up by French critics who are much more enthusiastic about it than Italian critics initially, and it not only is heralded by the French, but then becomes a highly influential film in terms of the aesthetics that are going to emerge in the following decade in the French New Wave. So, you know, Godard, Truffaut, Romer, others are deeply admiring.
Because Rossellini is experimental with reality. He deconstructs identity. He deconstructs really also the idea of an identity of a country. So he's really showing this movement, you know, this layering that we were talking about. So, for example, in the other sequence, it's another incredible sequence when she takes picture of the smoke.
Right.
You know, we see a close-up, you know, when they visit, and then they see all this smoking coming up, and you see the close-up of her with the camera. What is she doing? You know, she's taking picture of
smoke,
nothingness, and then at a certain point, you know, the smoke really fills the whole screen.
Absolutely,
the only thing you see is smoke.
Right.
So it's clear there. I mean, that is experimenting with the idea of recounting.
Well, let me take this. Let me take this in a direction with you, which is we began this discussion with the fact that she writes a letter to Roberto Rossellini because she is admiring of these two films that are canonical, foundational films of neo-realism. But one of the things that you're suggesting is that that we've got to see Rossellini as both that and much, much more than that.
Yes, and I think he said it himself regarding neorealism. Perhaps I should read this quote
briefly,
about the waiting.
just very briefly,
if you because you know he actually. Well, maybe I don't read.
Okay, talk to me. Tell me about it.
Waiting. I mean, Rossellini. This really is linked to this idea we were discussing about layering, specializing time. So Rossellini teaches us that you don't know what is going to happen in a moment, or in an hour, or tomorrow. You don't know. So, but the beauty of an artist, of exploring, of living, you know, is just the waiting, he says. So it's not the result of your, you know, perhaps, you know, in Antonioni terms, this could be translating in desiring, you know, this idea of going, but you don't know where you're going, you know. It's something that you discover while you are in the process of making, of living.
Right, absolutely.
So, and I think, and he said it in an interview with Verdone, he said it explicitly, you know, waiting is really what makes
this is
life.
very important, I think, what you said, because it's such a different notion of how to structure storytelling from what is the most common Hollywood notions, which is which is that it's not waiting, it is getting to the place. And so when they talk about famously there being dead time, that's actually, in a certain sense, a misnomer given Rossellini's conception of time, because that's when we're living. It's not dead time. That's when we're actually living in anticipation of something.
Yes, and in fact, I think the film is also sort of it's troubling also the end of this film, because you have this reconciliation. I mean, and you have this miracle, right? And it's funny because it happens, with Easter. That is a typical Southern Eastern procession of Madonna, all dressed in black, and this reconciliation, the crowd, and then this embrace of the couple. But I'm not sure that's really the end of the film somehow,
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because immediately after this shot, the embrace, you see the crowds moving in front of the camera. You see this movement. So it's like, it reminds me of this sort of fluidity in the narrative of Rossellini. I mean, even in the last episode of Paisa, right? The water that you see when the parties, well,
this sense of the openness of life that is characteristic of some of the endings is going to have to be our ending for our episode today, because but this leads people, we don't want to close the discussion here. We want to open it for people to think about this film. If you've enjoyed today's discussion and today's film, please visit us again. Now, how do you find out what our schedule is? How do you find out about us? Easy. Use the internet and go to www.cuny.tv. There you're going to find our menu. You can click on City Cinematheque. You'll always know what we're screening. Also, you'll find click-ons for comments, or if you wish to sign up for our e-list. So please visit www.cuny.tv. Eugenia, it's been a very fast 30 minutes, a very rich one. It's ending up being an open-ended one, but that's not a bad thing. You'll have to come back and we'll talk about stories again, okay?
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today here on City Cinematheque. And please join us again as we stroll through the archives of film history. Bye-bye for now.